So, when you think about the U.S. Constitution, what comes to mind? Probably some old, dusty document, right? Locked away behind glass. Well, today, we're going to look at it a totally different way. We're going to see it for what it was really meant to be, a living, breathing blueprint for a country, one that was actually designed to change. Pretty cool, right? Let's get into it.
And that really begs the question, doesn't it? I mean, how can a document written back in the 1700s, with quill pens and all that, still have any say in a world with smartphones, AI, even space travel? It seems impossible. But the secret, and this is the key, isn't that it's super rigid. It's actually the complete opposite. It's all about its incredible built-in flexibility.
Okay, so a broken system, the first draft. Before they landed on the Constitution we know today, they had a first attempt, and let's just say it didn't go so well. This first draft was called the Articles of Confederation, and it was basically the country's trial run at being a country.
So what was the big difference? It all came down to a totally different way of thinking. The Articles of Confederation set up what they called a League of Friendship. Think of it like a book club, right? The states were all individual members. They could hang out, but ultimately, they were totally independent. The central government, it had basically no power, couldn't even collect taxes. The Constitution just threw that whole idea out the window. It created a permanent federation. This wasn't a club you could leave. This was a family. And that's what made it a truly unified nation.
All right, so on to the nation's blueprint, a new design. So the old system was out, and this new blueprint was in. And it introduced a pretty revolutionary idea at the time, this concept of sharing power, which they called dual sovereignty. And here's how that blueprint actually works in practice. It's all about who gets to do what. The federal government got what are called delegated powers. You can think of this as the big picture stuff for the whole country, things like coining money or dealing with other nations. But then everything else, and I mean everything else, was left to the states. These are the reserve powers. We're talking about things that really shape your day-to-day life, your local schools, the police department, all that stuff. It's this incredible balancing act that's literally built into the very design. Okay, so next up, designed to evolve, the blueprint's secret. Dividing a power was smart, no doubt, but that was only part of the puzzle. The real genius, the absolute secret sauce of this whole blueprint, was that it was designed to evolve. And that leads us to this fascinating paradox. You'd think to make something stable, you'd make it rigid, unchangeable, right? But the founders knew the world was always going to change, so they did the opposite. They built a system that was made to change, precisely so it could achieve stability. It's an incredible idea. It's designed to bend so it never, ever breaks. And this whole concept has a name you might have heard of. We call it a living document, and it's exactly what it sounds like. The Constitution isn't some artifact frozen in time back in 1787. It's meant to grow, to adapt to new challenges we could never have imagined, all through a combination of official updates and just looking at the words and figuring out what they mean for us today.
All right, two engines of change, how it works. So, how does this living thing actually happen? Well, you can think of the blueprint as having two powerful engines that keep it moving forward.
Okay, to really get this, let's stick with that blueprint idea and think of the Constitution as a house. Formal change, that's the official amendment process, that's like a major renovation. You're knocking down walls, adding a whole new wing. It's a huge deal, it's difficult, and everyone has to agree on it. Now, informal change, that's like redecorating the house. You're not touching the walls or the foundation, but by changing the furniture, painting the walls a different color, you can completely change how the house feels and how you live in it. Both are powerful ways to change the home.
So let's talk about that first engine, formal change, the amendment process. This is when we literally go in and change the words on the page. And I gotta tell you, they made this process really hard on purpose. You need massive, overwhelming agreement from pretty much everyone to get an amendment passed.
But even though it's hard, these renovations have completely transformed the country. Think about it. The 16th Amendment, allowing for an income tax, basically funded the entire modern government we have today. The 19th Amendment, it doubled the number of voters by giving women the right to vote. And of course, the huge ones, the Reconstruction Amendments after the Civil War, which abolished slavery and started the incredibly long and still ongoing fight for real civil rights for everyone. Okay, but just as powerful, maybe even more so day to day, is that second engine, informal change. This is all about how we interpret the blueprint and the traditions we build around it. This is the redecorating we were talking about. And this is where it gets really mind-blowing. Think about two of the most powerful things in American government:
political parties and the Supreme Court's ability to strike down laws. Guess what? Neither one is actually written down in the Constitution, not a word. Political parties just happened. They grew out of custom. And judicial review, that massive power of the Supreme Court, the court basically gave that power to itself through a court case. That's informal change. And you could argue it shaped the country just as much as any formal amendment.
Okay, so this brings us to today, the living Constitution, a modern battleground. Because this isn't just some history lesson. This whole process of interpreting the blueprint is happening as we speak. And the main battlefield? It's the broad, sometimes vague language that's already in the document.
Just look at this language from the 14th Amendment. You see phrases like due process of law and equal protection of the laws. Now, what do those actually mean? They sound big and important, and they are, but they're also really broad. They don't give you a checklist of specific rights. They give you a principle, and that's not a mistake. It's the whole point. That ambiguity is exactly why these very words are at the heart of so many of our biggest legal fights today over what our rights even are.
And that's really the final takeaway here. That text was written way back in 1868, right after the Civil War. So the question that every single generation has to answer for itself, our generation included, is what does equal protection of the laws mean for us, right now? How we answer that question is what keeps this old blueprint from just being a piece of history. It's what proves it's still very, very much alive.